The scripture reading is from the Gospel of John, the 15th chapter, verses 12 through 14. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. Thank you, Charity. Thank you, Danny, Terry. Two or 3 years ago, I had occasion to visit I don't know what to call it, where my parents are interred. They were cremated, so they don't have a grave. They have a niche. I guess that's what you call it. I went there to visit them, to also see if the date of death for my father had been put on the plaque. He died in 2008, and I know at least 6 years after that, they hadn't put the date on there, so I went back to check. They still hadn't put the date on there, so I went to the office. And this was north of Green Valley in the cemetery that's reserved for military. My father was in World War II. When I saw that the date of death wasn't there, I went to the office and asked if I could speak to someone to see what the problem was. I had a feeling I knew what the problem was, but I wanted to see if the people in the cemetery knew what was going on. And I met the nicest gentleman who turned out to be the owner of not only that cemetery, but another one, both of them dedicated to the military. And I talked to him about it, and he assured me that as soon as possible, they would find out what was going on, and they would put the attachment to the plaque there so everything would be intact. And he handed me his card that I might be able to contact him if things didn't go as he had promised, that I had hoped. And I read the card, and the card said, Colonel Donald Doc Ballard. And above that, in small print, read, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, having had a father and a grandfather, both who served in the military, and a brother, I was most impressed. Never met a recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. I've never met what most people would consider a true hero. And he didn't speak of it, but I was impressed enough to go home and look up on the internet to see if it would tell me why he received this medal. I'd like to read to you the commendation that was presented to him by President Nixon. The citation reads, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life and beyond the call of duty while serving as an HC-2C, Hospital Corpsman Second Class, with Company M in connection with operations against enemy aggressor forces. During the afternoon hours, Company M was moving to join the remainder of the 3rd Battalion in Quang Tri Province. This was in Vietnam. After treating and evacuating 2 heat casualties, HC-2C Ballard was returning to his platoon from the evacuation landing zone when the company was ambushed by a North Vietnamese Army unit employing automatic weapons and mortars and sustained numerous casualties. Observing a wounded Marine, HC-2C Ballard unhesitatingly moved across the fire-swept terrain to the injured man and swiftly rendered medical assistance to his comrade. HC-2C Ballard then directed 4 Marines to carry the casualty to a position of relative safety. As the 4 men prepared to move the wounded Marine, an enemy soldier suddenly left his concealed position and, after hurling a hand grenade which landed near the casualty, commenced firing upon the small group of men. Instantly shouting a warning to the Marines, HC-2C Ballard fearlessly threw himself upon the lethal explosive device to protect his comrades from the deadly blast. When the grenade failed to detonate, he calmly arose from his dangerous position and resolutely continued his determined efforts in treating other Marine casualties. HC-2C Ballard's heroic actions and selfless concern for the welfare of his companions served to inspire all who observed him and prevented possible injury or death to his fellow Marines. His courage, daring initiative, and unwavering devotion to duty in the face of extreme personal danger sustain and enhance the finest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service. Is there a better example of the scripture I read a few moments ago? Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. About 15 years ago or so, I had occasion to travel to New York, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia. Saw a lot of very interesting sights, quite a few memorials, but one impressed me more than all the others: the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, sometimes called the Tomb of the Unknowns. There are actually 3 soldiers there, one from World War I, one from World War II, and one from the Korean conflict. At one time there were 4. The 4th one was identified on the basis of mitochondrial DNA, so he was no longer unknown. So he was removed and not replaced. I was so impressed by the sentinels who kept watch over that tomb. They have done so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year since 1926. No matter what the weather, no matter what the conditions, no matter if there were any threat, they were there. I was so impressed, I went in and looked up what it took to be a sentinel or a guard at the Tomb of the Unknown. The qualifications are daunting, to say the least. They are held to the highest standards, both on duty and off, for the rest of their lives. I couldn't believe that. I didn't know at the time, but below the tomb is a very large area where they have their barracks when they're on duty and they're not walking above. They're down there below getting ready to walk above. They're on duty 24 hours, and the time that they walk back and forth varies from a half hour to 2 hours. It's most impressive to see how they walk 21 steps from one side to the other. They don't do an about face. They turn and face the tomb for 21 seconds. Then they turn back the direction they came from, shifted the gun to the outside shoulder, waited 21 seconds, and walked 21 seconds, or 21 steps back where they had started, to repeat it once more. And I thought, how do they do that? To me, they were heroes. And if you go on the website, they very proudly list the names of all who have served as sentinels. Like I said, I believe them to be heroes. And one of those heroes is a member of our congregation. Maybe you know about this. I'm usually the last to know anything. But as casually as I'm looking around, I don't see Paul Frinthal here this morning. I had no idea. He doesn't talk about it. He served from June of 1965 to October of 1967. He was a sentinel, the assistant relief commander, and finally the commander of the relief. I am proud to list him as a friend of mine. I am honored whenever I see him. There's two heroes of mine. I have another hero, rather different. Her name was Naomi Ruth Hull, and she was my grandmother. She was all of about 5'0", and try as I might, I can't think of a time that I wasn't taller than she. I was always looking down at her. But in her faith, she was a giant. She was born and grew up in Lamoni, and of course went to church there, a church member. She was good friends with Joseph Smith III, Vida Smith, and Audentia Anderson. And I recall one weekend we took a trip, the family took a trip up to Lamoni. And we walked across the campus. I'm not sure what they call that big brick building, administration building. It's got a turret and a tower. We got up there and my grandmother took me aside. She said, "Would you walk with me?" I said, "Of course." And we started down this path. I don't know if it was in front or in back of this building. I couldn't tell. But we walked down toward where the chapel is, or church. There's a library down there now, too. And on the way down there, she said, "I have always enjoyed walking down this path ever since I heard Vida and Audentia sing the old path." And of course, you know, they wrote it. And I'm thrilled that Aaron took my invitation for us to open with that song. And how true it is, you know, fearless walk with the Nazarene. My grandmother was fearless. She never, ever raised her voice. But if I did something wrong, when I did something wrong, she would just look at me like this. Kent. At which time I promptly walked out under the door. I felt so small. And I never did whatever it was again. I couldn't bear to disappoint my grandmother. My mother was a different matter, but not my grandmother. She taught me most of what I know, which isn't much. One other hero I'd like to tell you about in my own personal life. I don't know, it may sound self-serving, but that hero is here today. And she's my daughter, Mackenzie. When she was 3 or 4, her mother and I were no longer married. And I had to go to Olathe in order to pick up Mackenzie. And I had to pick her up at a daycare center. And it is so firmly etched in my mind. This one time I picked her up, and she was just happy-go-lucky, as always. And I asked her how her day went. And she said, "Oh, it was great." I said, "Well, what did you do?" She said, "Oh, we played and learned a few things." And I said, "Well, anything new?" And she said, "There was a new girl who came today, and nobody would play with her." I said, "Really?" Nobody wanted to play with her. And I said, "Well, what did you do?" She said she needed a friend, so I gave her one. That's been 30-some years ago, and I will never, ever forget that. She needed a friend, so I gave her one. And that's the way she lives her life today. I have a difficult time meeting people and making friends. She makes friends like they're going out of style. And her friends are friends for life. I've met some of her friends from junior high, high school, the 2 colleges she played volleyball for, and they all think the world of her. I think her in-laws love her as much as I do. She's that kind of person. Okay, so those are my 4 heroes. But I began to think about other heroes. And I put together a list. This one's for the kids and my grandchildren, Michaela and Cole. See if you recognize these. Superman, Batman, Green Hornet, Spider-Man, Supergirl, Wonder Woman, the Incredible Hulk, Mighty Mouse. That's showing my age. Thor, Captain America. Many of our children only see heroes on this list. And I feel so sorry for them. Their heroes are not real. And they're certainly not ones they can emulate. They can't fly. They don't flash a signal into the sky. They don't turn green. But to a lot of people, that's their idea of a hero. They save humanity. What humanity needs saving from is themselves. See if this list resonates with you. George Washington, Sergeant Alvin York. You can see some of you are going, who? Audie Murphy, Booker T. Washington, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, John J. Pershing, Tecumseh, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Oscar Schindler, Pocahontas. And help me with this one. Angèle Ganshi Boyashio. You've all heard of her, right? Because she's commonly known as Mother Teresa. Those are heroes. Some of them, 4 of them, their heroism was associated with the military. The rest were not. But they've always been considered heroes. And that's a mark in favor of our country, that we would consider them heroes. Third list, I'd like for you to see if you can figure out what these people have in common. Peter Marshall, Billy Sunday, Billy Graham, Horatio Gates Spafford, John Newton, Carrie Nation, Florence Nightingale, Fanny Crosby, Dwight Moody, and Helen Keller. Have they accomplished something heroic? Yes, they have. They were heroic. One of them still is. In their faith. That's what they have in common. They are Christian heroes who have spread the gospel, who have witnessed to people of the goodness of the God we worship, of the Savior we follow. They are true heroes. See if we can recognize these. Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Esther, Mordecai, Job, Joshua, David, Rahab, Ruth, Solomon, Samson, Noah, Nehemiah, Daniel, Jonah, and Shamgar. Did I lose you on Shamgar? Shamgar was a soldier for the Israelites. And when they were fighting the Philistines, he took an ox goad, which is a farming implement, and slew 600 Philistines by himself. He's one of their heroes. My favorite hero on this list is Esther, who saved the Jewish people. Esther was married to King Xerxes. In the Bible, he's referred to as Ahasuerus, whatever, her husband. And he controlled 127 provinces. And there was an evil man who was one of his advisors. His name was Haman. And he worked himself into a position where he sent out a decree that all the Jews were to be executed on a certain day in a certain month. Well, Mordecai overheard the plans. He told them to Esther and urged her to tell the king. And she was at a loss how to do that, because she could not go into the king's presence. Not even the queen could go into the king's presence without being summoned on pain of death. But she was heroic. She went into the king's presence. And she invited him to come to a banquet. And Haman was invited too, which of course puffed him up. And while eating at the banquet, she revealed to the king Haman's plan. And the king was horrified. And he immediately had Haman executed. And he turned to Esther and asked her to send a decree out to every province in their own language, countermanding what Haman had done. She saved the entire Jewish nation. And to this day, the Jews celebrate the holiday of Purim, when Esther became a hero. Very inspiring. This list is a little different. Paul, Mary, mother of Jesus, John the Baptist, Mark, Peter, John the Beloved, Timothy, Jude, Matthew, Martha, Stephen, and Thomas. Also heroes of the Christian faith. They were in the New Testament. The previous list was the Old Testament. Many of the heroes are kids these days think highly of and enjoy watching and read. No, they don't read. Seeing on movies or on TV are what they call superheroes. I don't know what makes a superhero. I hope you do. To me, they're just other characters. But I thought about that, and I thought, I wonder if there's any Christian superheroes. And I believe there are. I would call these superheroes, because in the Christian faith, what I believe makes a superhero is referred to by the word martyr. Those who gave their lives in service to Christ. Some of these names you might not recognize. Jan Hus was actually a predecessor of Martin Luther in moving toward Protestantism. Joan of Arc, Thomas à Becket, Thomas More, William Tyndale, Joseph Smith Jr., Hiram Smith, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Thomas Cranmer, and Roland Taylor. And when I saw that name, I thought, that looks familiar. And I looked up my research on my genealogy, and I have it all blocked out. Roland Taylor was an ancestor of mine, direct ancestor. He died in 1555 for refusing to renounce his faith. At that time, King Edward II had died. He was the king right after Henry VIII. And the only one who could reign after him was Mary. And they didn't particularly like reigning queens. Plus the fact that Mary was Roman Catholic. Well, coming after Henry VIII, who established the Church of England, Protestant, it was quite a change to go back to Mary, who was ruthless in her persecution of the Protestants. If they didn't renounce, if they didn't convert, they were done away with. My ancestor refused, and he was burned at the stake in 1555. But he was so well thought of that, and this sounds strange, there was a man in the crowd who thought a lot of him, and he took a halberd, big weapon, and struck him over the head, killing him instantly. Sparing him the awful, awful torment of being burned alive. I think that man's a hero also. A hero is a person noted for courageous acts or nobility of character. You don't have to do something the world thinks heroic in order to be a hero. Also, a person who, in the opinion of others, has special achievements, abilities, or personal qualities and is regarded as a role model or ideal. There's one last hero, and he is referred to as the supreme hero. His name was Jesus Christ. Has there been anyone ever who was more noble of character than Jesus? Has there ever been anyone who has had comparable special achievements, or abilities or personal qualities? And is there any better role model for everyone? In New Testament Greek, the words for faith, trust, and belief all come from the same root word. It's no wonder then that the truest hero of faith is Jesus Christ himself. His faith and trust were in the plan of the Father. Though himself fully God, Jesus the Son forsook his throne in heaven for the plan of salvation for the people he loves so much, us, all of us. Even as he performed miracles, he taught his disciples a firm reliance on the Father, casting out demons only by prayer and by pointing out that the Father provides for the birds of the air, and even more so for the people whom he loves. Before his arrest, Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, "Not my will, but your will." And even on the cross, Jesus showed compassion, calling for God to forgive his killers. John writes at the end of his gospel that Jesus did many other things, to the point that the world could not contain all the books it would require. And we know that Jesus is indeed still working today, so the world could not contain all it would require. He is the supreme hero. He is the supreme martyr. He is the ideal. An ideal for which each of us must strive. There are some youth today, I'm sure all of them in this room, all of them in this congregation, who have a very strong faith. I had a student probably 15 years ago who wrote a poem that really struck me. I don't know if she went to church. In reading this, I find it hard to believe that she didn't go to church. So in closing, I'd like to read what she wrote. I looked at you and smiled the other day. I thought you'd see me, but you didn't. I said I love you and waited for what you would say. I thought you'd hear me, but you didn't. I asked you to come outside and play ball with me. I thought you'd follow me, but you didn't. I drew a picture just for you to see. I thought you'd save it, but you didn't. I made a fort for us back in the woods. I thought you'd camp with me, but you didn't. I found some worms and such for fishing if we could. I thought you'd want to go, but you didn't. I needed you just to talk to, my thoughts to share. I thought you'd want to, but you didn't. I told you about the game, hoping you'd be there. I thought surely you'd come, but you didn't. I asked you to share my youth with me. I thought you'd want to, but you couldn't. My country called me to war. You asked me to come home safely, but I didn't. She writes, "This is to all my heroes who sacrificed their time to help others. Also, this goes out to everyone who lost his or her life on September 11th. This was just a few months after that. You were all my heroes. God bless you all."